We begin today the Gemara on Daf Nun Amud Beis. I think it's 11 lines up from the top bottom of the Yom, where it says Davar Halamed B'Kavachaymer. So the Gemara here is discussing regarding different limudim, that by Kotchim it's different than by Kolater Kula. So the limudim we're discussing is a Hekesh, a Gzeir Shaveh, and a Kavachaymer. If I have a limud, and then from there I want to take from that source and make a second limud to another place, does that work by Kotchim? So we brought sources before how this works regarding a Hekesh. Then after the Hekesh, I want to make a second limud. We brought the sources before how that works with a Gzeir Shaveh, after Gzeir Shaveh to make a second limud. And now the Gemara is discussing a Kavachaymer. If I have an idea that I only know by Kotchim from a Kavachaymer, could I then make a second limud from there afterwards? Okay, so now the shaila we're discussing is Davar Halamed B'Kavachaymer. If you have a halacha in Kotchim that you only learned out through a Kavachaymer, Ma'al Shi'alamed B'Binyanav. Could I then learn from there to yet another place with a binyanav? So the concept of binyanav we saw yesterday means that I'm comparing two cases logically. It's also called a mematzinu. If I find the Torah says a halacha or a rule in one place, so then I logically compare it to other places, unless you have a reason to refute or to show a distinction, but otherwise I compare them. So that's the shaila. Once I have a kavachaymer, could I then compare and learn out to another place? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, so Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Toshama, I'll bring you a proof from the following braisa. It says, Molak v'nimtzes treifa, by the bird, so you don't shecht it with a knife, but it's done with the fingernail of the kayin, and afterwards you see that the bird is a treifa. So treifa means that you look inside the bird, there's a defect, it can't live for 12 months. The question is, regarding tumah, that's what we're going to be discussing over here. The bird, now, will it be metame or not? Okay, so before we see the Gemara inside, the general halacha, there's a difference between a behema and a bird. A behema that is an avela, meaning it didn't get a shechita properly, the meat of the behema is metame whether you touch it or whether you carry it. By a bird though, that's an avela, the Torah says a different halacha. If you touch it or you carry it, you do not become tameh. You become tameh if it goes bebeis habliya, if you swallow it, if it's in your throat. That's the only way that it's metame. That's a behema or a bird that had no shechita properly at all. What happens though if it had a shechita and then you see that the behema has or the bird we're talking about here, the bird has a defect, it's a treifa. So it did have a shechita properly, but it's a treifa. Will it, again? Well, over here we're talking about malika, but it's also similar shaila benegay to shechita. There's a shaila regarding a case where the bird was shechted and then you find it to be a treifa. So it's not a regular nevela. It was shechted, but now you see that it's a treifa. And the same also regarding this case that we're talking about over here, malika, and then you see that it's a treifa. Will this bird be metame like a bird that's a nevela that's usually metame when it goes into the throat of the person? So there are three opinions here. The Gemara starts, the Braisa first starts with two opinions. Rav Meir says, Eine metame bebeis habliya. The regular kind of tumah that a bird, an avela, would cause when a person swallowed it in his throat would not happen over here because it was done. The malika was done. Malika by a bird, which is kotchim, is in the place of shchita, and just like shchita would cause that it should not be mitame anymore, even if it's a treifa. So he says the same is with malika. That's Rav Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says no.
At all.
Not metame at all, correct. It's saying bebeis habliya because that's b'chlal what the tumah of a bird causes. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says metame bebeis habliya, that it will be metame bebeis habliya, just like the halacha of a nevela, of a bird that's a nevela. So over here as well, the melike of a treifa by kotchim will not take it out of the status of a nevela. And now that you see that it's a treifa, that melike cannot take it out of that status. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Omer Rab Meir. Now, a second, just to clarify, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not only the malika. Rabbi Yehuda is really arguing on Rab Meir and saying whether it was malika, whether it was shchita by the bird, either way, now that it's treifa, so it's going to be the shchita or the malika was not qualified because you see now that it's treifa. So therefore, the halacha of tumah will apply. The regular tumah of the bird will apply when it's in the base habliya of the person. But Rav Meir though says the shechita will take away the status of it being an avela, and therefore the malika also will take away the status of it being an avela, even though it's found to be a treifa. Okay, so now how does Rav Meir prove his opinion? Amar Rav Meir kavachaymer. I'll prove this to you with the following kavachaymer, because we're talking here about a bird. But what's the halacha by a behema? By a behemoth, as I mentioned, the level of tumah is much more severe. By a behemoth that's an avela, the tumah is not just when you swallow it. The tumah is even when you touch it or carry it. So if so, you can have the following kal v'chomer. If when it comes to the nevela, an animal that wasn't shechted, a dead carcass. So if you touch it or carry it, it's metame, but shchite mitaheres. But when you shecht it, then it purifies it. Again, shchita mitaheres treifasa mitumasa. So the shchita will be mitayered, and that's even if the animal turns out to be a treifa. There's a defect in it that it's called a treifa, but the shchita is going to be mitayered. Now we're not talking here about eating. Of course you can't eat from it because it's a treifa, but it's going to be mitayered from the tumah. Once you shecht it, it's not an avail, it's not a dead carcass. It was shechted, and it removes the status of tumah that would be on this. So that's even when it was a treifa.
But the tumah, it was when the behemah was alive?
No. The tumah is when it's an avela. A behemoth that was not shechted and it's a dead carcass, that's where the tumah is, in the behemoth, if you touch it or carry it. But if you shecht it, so it's also dead, but it was killed through a shchita, even if it's a treifa and you can't eat from it, but it doesn't matter. The status of tumah will not be here like it would have been if it was an avela. That's what you see by a behemoth. So nivlas oif, if so, or nevelas oif, that is, when it comes to the dead carcass of the bird, she'ein metama b'maga b'masa. This tumah is not as severe of a tumah. It's not by touch or carry. It's only when it's in the throat. Ein edin, so most definitely the din should be shetehei shchitasa mitaheres treifasa mitumasa, that when you shecht it, it should purify. That even though it's a treifa, still the tumah should not be in effect. This is the kal v'chomer that Rab Meir says from a behemoth to a oif regarding what shchita. I'm learning out there from shchita to what the halacha here is regarding shchita by the bird. So now he goes a step further. Once I have that kal v'chomer regarding a bird that was shechted, but here, though we're talking about a bird that was not shechted, here we're talking about a bird that milika was done for it. So now I go to the next step after the kal v'chomer and I say a binyanav, or as the Gemara calls it, a mamatzinu. Now mamatzinu b'shchita shemachsharasa ba'achile. So just like I find regarding an animal, that when you shecht an animal, and it's a kosher animal, it's not a treifa. When it's kosher, what does it do? Now you could eat the animal. So now that shchita itself, mitaheres treifasa. When it's not going to be kosher, it's a treifa, but the shchita will have the ability to at least not to get rid of the content of tumah that would have been if it was not shechted. So I see that shchita does two things. When it's not a treifa, you can eat from it. And that shchita as well, when the animal is a treifa, but at least you can't eat from it, but at least it will not cause tumah. So again, mitaheres treifasa mitumasa. So af malike, so too I should compare and say that the same kind of rule applies to malike. That af malike shamach sharta ba'achile. What by malike, by a carbon? What does a malike do? The kayanim could eat from this bird after they did malike. There was no proper shchita, but by a carbon, the malike now is machshir to eat from it. So too, titayr treifasa mitumasa. When you do the malike, even if the bird was found to be a treifa, so you can't eat from it, but it should remove the status of tumah that would be if it was an avela. That's Rab Meir's source. Now, what do you see here in what Rab Meir said? He starts with a kal v'chomer from a behemoth that has a more severe tumah to a bird that has a lesser tumah, and after he has the kal v'chomer, he then adds to that to apply it to malika with a binyanav. So this is the Gemara's source that by kachim you could start with a kal v'chomer, and then afterwards you can add to that a binyanav. Okay, now there's a third opinion here in this braisa. Rabbi Yosi says, even if I agree to Rab Meir's concept, this kal v'chomer, but not as far as he goes, because I say daya kin nivlas behemoth taira. Since the source began with this kal v'chomer, so therefore I can't be metayer this bird more than the source of the kal v'chomer. They're a daya. It's enough that it should be like the source as it is by the dead carcass of an animal, or behemoth tahira. Sheshchitasa mitarasa. Over there, only the shchita will be mitayer it. That means even if it's a treifa, but it's only the shchita that will cause that it should not be an avela that's matama. But v'loy milikasa, there's no malika by a behemoth. So therefore, what Rabbi Yosi says is this concept that a bird that's found a treifa and it will not be matama is only if you shechted the bird. Not if you did malika. Okay, so that's the three opinions here. Rabbi Yehuda holds, one second, let me just summarize the three opinions here. Rabbi Meir holds a bird that's found a treifa, regardless, it doesn't matter. Whether you did shchita, whether you did malika, by both of them, it's metayered from being an avela of being metame. Rabbi Yehuda says, the moment it's found a treifa, so not shchita is going to help, and not malika is going to help. The treifa itself is the reason that I now put this bird into the status of an avela, which is metame when you swallow. Rabbi Yossi is making a distinction. For shchita, the shchita helps to remove it from the status of treifa, at least regarding the tumah. That's what we're talking about here, the tumah. But malika does not help for that. That's the third opinion here.
But for the pain, it does help the malika.
For eating it, correct. But when it's a treifa, though,
in his hand with his thumbnail in the neck. So at that
correct.
point, it becomes tummy.
Interesting. If it turns out to be a treifa and he did the malika, perhaps he becomes tameh. Yeah, I don't know if the bird dies immediately when he does the malika. It has to be the bird when it's not alive anymore.
We equated malika with the shchita insofar as the pain only. He can use the term malika to say shchita. We can.
Correct. Well, it's to be able to eat from it. Correct. Yeah. Only here by kotchim, but this. Yeah, correct. That's where malika applies. But Rabbi Yossi makes a distinction between malika and shchita. Okay. The main reason the Gemara brought this up is for Rabbi Meir's opinion, where you see he said a kavachaymer, and then after the kavachaymer he followed up with a binyanav. Okay, but now the Gemara says in this, there's no proof from there. Veloihi, there's no ra'ay from there. Why? Because hasam tehevi. Now this lashon the Gemara is saying over here is tehevi or hasam tehevi. Let it even be as you say, but nevertheless he mishchita d'chulin ka'asyan. The original source of the kavachaymer comes from shchita d'chulin. Okay, but before I explain what the Gemara means by shchita d'chulin, Rashi explains the lashon that it says here before. The Gemara doesn't just say veloihi. The Gemara adds hasam tehevi. Over there, let it be like you say. What does Gemara mean by that? What it means to say by that is that later in the Gemara, it's going to say that really it's not a binyanav. This whole thing over here that we're saying regarding the bird, that the malika is metayered from being nevela, is based on a pasuk. So it's not really learned from a binyanav. It's the pasuk that there's a hekish, zois teiris ha-behema v'ha'oif. So that's really what it is. So there's no raya regarding the end of binyanav. But the Gemara is saying, even if you're going to ignore that pasuk that's brought later in the Masechta, and you're going to want to say, yeah, this is a kavachaymer, and then a binyanav that follows up after the kavachaymer, but look at the kavachaymer. What's the original source of the kavachaymer? Mishchite d'chulin ka'asyan. The original source of the kavachaymer, we're learning out from the shchita of a behema, not regarding kachim, regarding chulin. We're discussing over here these limudim, whether I can make these secondary limudim, like kavachaymer, then a binyanav, or all the other ones that the Gemara discussed before, all in the framework of hektish. By chulin, that's not a discussion. Over there you could, for sure. So over here, the point is that here the Rashi says, our Gemara goes according to the opinion that the Gemara brought before in Daf Nun, that we go by the malamed. The malamed means the original source. If the original source is chulin, then you're able to make a secondary limud. We don't go by the lomed. We don't go by the case that you're learning it out to. You go to the original source. Over here, the original source is of a behema, a regular behema of chulin that was shechted and was found to be a treifa. So therefore, there's no source over here to this shaila whether you can make a binyanav after a kavachaymer.
So you're saying over here that because it's hegdish, it should be more chomer.
Correct. Correct.
Not as a real difference. Just
no, that's as a rule that applies only by hektish. Correct. Yeah, no, this is a special rule by hektish. Okay, now the Gemara goes on to the last thing to discuss over here, whether you can make a secondary limud, and that is davar alame b'binyanav. If you have a halacha by hektish that was only learned with a binyanav, or I'm using the word hektish, let me correct that. It's more kachim. Kachim meaning karbonis, not just any hektish. So specifically benegayet to kachim. So you have something that was learned with a binyanav. Mao shilamed. Could I then learn out a second limud? The hekish, or b'gzeir shaveh, or b'kavachaymer, or b'binyanav. Could I then learn out with any of these limudim? That's the shaila. Says the Gemara. Okay, you're asking regarding all these limudim. Pshait meha chada. You can resolve and answer at least one of these from the following brayse. Okay, so what's this brayse speaking about? The Gemara goes straight into the Inyan, but as Rashi here brings, what this brayse is speaking about is halacha we had earlier in the Masechta regarding karbonis. Even if it was a pasal carbon, if it was brought onto the Mizbeach, once it was brought onto the Mizbeach, you don't take it off. It's learned from a pasuk that kol hanegeh b'mizbeach yikdash. I think that was the pasuk. Once it's on the Mizbeach, it's left there. But there are certain exceptions. There are certain kinds of psulim in a carbon that even after it's brought onto the Mizbeach, you have to remove it. And it's learned from the miyutim that it says in the pasuk, Zais teiras ha'ayla, hi ha'ayla. Zais is a miyut, ha'ayla is a miyut, and hi ha'ayla. So these are miyutim. There are certain psulim that even after it's brought on the mizbech, you have to remove it. One of them is if it was shechted at night, or if the blood was sprayed by night. So if it was done by night, that's a kind of psul. Or if the blood was outside of the machne, taken outside of the azara, or if the blood became tomei. I think that's what it is. There are so here Rashi brings. Oh no, the third one is if the blood spilled, if the blood of the carbon spilled. So then meaning it was never in a keli, it spilled. Those are psulim that if the carbon was brought onto the mizbeach, you have to take it off. But anything other than those, we learn from the pasuk that if it's pasul, but it's brought onto the mizbeach, you leave it there. It stays on the mizbeach. Okay, so now this Braisa explains why we say this. Mipnei ma omru, why was it said regarding the psul of lon, badam, kosher, that if blood of the carbon was left overnight, and the blood, once it comes shkia, you're supposed to spray the blood on the day the carbon was brought. Once it becomes shkia, it's pasul. But nevertheless, kosher. If it's brought into the mizbeach, b'di'eved, it's left there, it's kosher. We'll see later in the Masechta. This either means regarding the zrika of the dam itself, that once it's sprayed on the mizbeach, then b'di'eved it's kosher, or it means in a case where the blood was after shkia, then the sacrificial parts that are brought on the mizbeach, b'di'eved it's kept there. So why am I saying that this is a kind of psol, the b'di'eved, leave it on the mizbeach? Sharei, because I find something similar, that lon be'emurim, that the parts of the carbon that are brought in the mizbeach, if that's left after shkia, if that's left overnight, that kosher, that if it's brought into the mizbeach, you don't remove it. So just like that's true regarding the parts of the carbon, I say similar regarding the blood as well. Now, lon be'emurim kosher. Why do I say by these parts, once it's brought on the mizbeach, that b'di'evet keep it there? Shaharei lam bebasar kosher. Because regarding the basar of the carbon, this is the meat that is not supposed to go on the mizbeach. This is the meat that the kohenim or the owner eats from it. Over there, it's completely kosher. Let's say a carbon shlomim. A carbon shlomim, you eat the carbon not just that day. You eat it the following night, and you eat it the next day as well. So since I see this concept regarding the basar, that it's intended to be eaten l'chatchila that day and the next day, so I say similar that I apply also by the parts that are burnt in the mizbeach and the blood as well, even though that must be done on the day that the carbon was brought. But b'di'evet, once it's brought in the mizbeach, I leave it there. That's been negated to the halacha of lon. Now yaitze, how about the blood that was in a case of yaitze? So b'di'evet, if it's brought into the mizbeach, so then it's kept over there. Okay, this is another case, yaitze. So we're talking about not when the blood went out of the chutz l'chlayim, but the carbon itself, the parts of the carbon that has to be burnt in the mizbeach. If it went outside of the azara, and then it was brought back in, once it's on the mizbeach, you leave it there. Why? Because hayil v'yaitze kasher b'bama. Since I see that there is this concept, that exists such a thing, by a bama, when there wasn't the Beis HaMikdash and you had a heter to bring a carbon on a bama, so the carbon could be sacrificed on a mizbeach and a bama outside without a Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, even when there is a Beis HaMikdash, the parts that have to be brought in the mizbeach, if it was taken out and now it was brought onto the mizbeach, b'di'evet, it's kept there. A third case of a psul. B'di'evet, if it's brought on the mizbeach, you have to keep it there, or you keep it there. Tomei, if the meat of the carbon that's brought onto the mizbeach became tomei, so why do you keep it there b'di'evet? Because since I see that tomei is a kind of psul, that in certain cases by a carbon sibor, there's a heter to bring the carbon even with a tomei. So therefore, since I see there's a heter regarding tomei, so b'di'evet, once it's brought on the mizbeach, it's kept there. Another case where it's possible, you keep it b'di'evet on the mizbeach, chutz l'zmanoi. If you have the machshava of pigul, that you're going to eat it out of its time, so it passes the carbon. You can't do the rest of the aveda. But b'diavad, if it was done, you keep it on the mizbeach. Why is that? Hoyel umeratze lipiguloi. Because even though the Aveda that's done later is not supposed to be done, but if the Aveda is done, the completion of the Aveda is what makes it qualified for Pigul. As we learned earlier in the Masechta, that the way it works by Pigul is, in order for the Pigul, the status of Pigul to take effect on the Behemoth, you have to complete the whole Aveda. Only if you complete the whole Aveda, that makes it Roy for Pigul. So since it's Meratze for the Pigul, so therefore, it b'diavad, if it's put on the Mizbeach, you leave it there. And the same with Chutz L'Mekaymai. If one shechted and he had a thought that it's going to be eaten out of its place, I say the same thing, b'diavad, you leave it on the Mizbeach, Chayel v'hokish Chutz L'Zmanai, because Chutz L'Mekaymai is learned from the same pasuk, it's compared to the Machshava of Chutz L'Zmanai. Shekiblu Psulin, another case, if a kayan that was pasul received the blood, and the Zarkin Daman, and they sprayed the blood, and then that's also a case that if it's brought onto the Mizbeach, leave it there b'diavad. Why is that? Where do you find any kind of concept regarding psulim that did the Aveda that you could say, oh, this is something that I find a case where there's a heta for it? We're talking about such kind of psulin that in Avedas Tzibur, they could do the Aveda. And what are we talking about? A kain that's tummy. We're not talking about a kain that's a Baal Mum that can't do Aveda ever. We're talking about a kain that's tamei, and when it has to be brought a carbon tzibur, tumo hotra b'tzibur, he can do the Aveda, and therefore, in a case where the kain that's tamei received the blood or sprayed the blood, even though you shouldn't bring it onto the mizbech, but the yavet, it's left there. Okay, this is the conclusion of the Braisa. Okay, but the Gemara brought this Braisa here for the point in the beginning that we see here, that we're learning out that something that's learned with a binyanav, you can learn it then with a second binyanav. Because in the Braisa in the beginning it said that regarding the blood, that it's kosher, and then it said, I compare the dam to the emurim, and then I compare again the emurim to the basar. This is what's called a binyanav. One binyanav and then a second binyanav. So this is the answer to the Ibaya. The Gemara was asking, by a kachim, could you learn out one binyanav and a second binyanav? Okay, but now the Gemara has a question on this Braisa. Could you learn out a case of something where it's b'diavad, it's possible. There's no hechsher for this. It's not supposed to be done this way. And where are you learning it out from? You're learning it out from a case where l'chatchila it could be done this way. It's totally kosher to be done this way. What is the Gemara asking? We're learning out the halacha regarding the emurim, which are not supposed to be kept to after shkia. And where are you learning it out from? You're learning it out from the fact that the basar of the carbon you can eat tomorrow. The basar of the carbon that you can eat tomorrow, that's l'chatchila. That's how you eat the basar. You eat it one day, then the second day. And from there, you're learning out regarding the emurim, which l'chatchila are not kosher after shkia. How are you learning out? And the same thing goes regarding, for example, the second limud, bama. If the part of the carbon went outside the Beis Hamikdash, b'diavad keep it on the mizbeach. Why? Because I see by the bama that such a thing is allowed. Well, bama was a time when there was no Beis Hamikdash b'chlal. That was l'chatchila done this way on the mizbeach. Why are we learning it out from a case which is l'chatchila done this way? So the Gemara answers, you're right. It's not really a valid limud to learn out this way. So Tana that is mizayis teiris ha'ile riba samachle. They're really the source of this Tana to say that there's only certain cases that are an exception, that once it's brought on the Mizbeach, you have to remove it. The exception is, as I said before, this pasuk, Zais, Tairis, Ha'ila, Ha'ila, has three miyutim in the lashon of the pasuk. Zais, Ha'ila, and then the continuation of the pasuk, Ha'ila. So there's three things that are excluded. Other than those three things, we go back to the other pasuk that it says, Kol Negev, Mizbech, Yikdash, that has to be kept on the Mizbech. So it's really all limudim from a pasuk. It's not based on this binyan av that we said here. Why does this Braisa bring the binyan av? The binyan av is, we're relying also on the binyan av of the svara to tell us what should we exclude, that even if it's brought on the mizbeach you have to remove, and what should we not exclude, what has to stay in the mizbeach. These are only svaras to explain the limudim. It's not based on these svaras. The svaras is to say, why am I learning some from this pasuk and some from the other pasuk? But in essence, it's limudim from psukim. So therefore, you can't ask that we're learning out from a dovish bechshere, from something that's lachatchila supposed to be done that way. Okay, this concludes this whole hamshach of the Gemara here regarding these limudim, how it works with secondary limudim regarding kachim. Now we go back to the Mishnah. What did it say in the Mishnah? Shiyari Adam. What do you do with the leftovers of the blood? So you spill them on the Yisaid Maravi Shal Mizbeach HaChitzen. the foundation of the Mizbeach, and that's by the western wall of the Mizbeach. So the Gemara, my time, why? What's the source for this? Why are we pouring the blood on the Yisoid, but where? On the western wall of the Mizbeach. Answer is because Makra, the pasuk says, Yisoid Mizbach Ha'ila Asher Pesach Ha'il Mayit. You're pouring it on the foundation of the Mizbeach Ha'ila, but where's this? That faces the entrance to the Ha'il Mayit. So when you come out of the Beis HaMikdash and you encounter the Mizbeach, so the wall of the Mizbeach that you come to first is the Maidav wall, because the Beis HaMikdash is on the west, is on the Maidav of the Mizbeach. So the first wall that you come to is the Maidav wall, and therefore Hahu the Paga Bereisha. So therefore you have to pour the blood right over there on that wall of the Mizbeach, by the side of the Mizbeach that you encounter first. Taisus over here has a discussion and says that it's mashma from the lashon of the Gemara, that it's not just the limud of the words the pasuk Asher Pesach Ha'il Mayid, but it's also based on the concept of ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. If you have a mitzvah to do and you have the first opportunity to do the mitzvah right there, to pour the blood by the foundation of the Mizbeach, you do it by the first wall of the Mizbeach that you come to. You don't walk further away and do the mitzvah by another wall. Tanur Rabbanan, regarding this halacha, we learned in a braisa. Now, this braisa here is based on the lashon that it says in the pasuk regarding this din of spilling the shirayim, the leftovers of the blood on the mizbeach. It says this in the Torah. Here, this braisa is going to be discussing 5 different times that it says this in the pasuk, and the karbanis in Parshas Vayikra. So you have 3 times that the pasuk uses the term El Yisaid Mizbach Ha'oila, as it says here. El Yisaid Mizbach Ha'oila. So it doesn't just say El Yisaid HaMizbeach, but it adds Ha'oila. And that it actually says 3 times. As Rashi here brings, you look in the parsha there, you'll see that it says it by the par Kayim Mashiach, by the par Helam Dovashal Tzibur, and then by the soir of a nasi, that's a king that brings his carbon. 3 times it uses this term of Mizbeach Ha'olah. Then after that, the Torah talks about the regular carbon chatos, which could be brought either from a seira or a kizbah, from a goat or a lamb, and there it says Yisoid Mizbeach, it doesn't say Ha'olah. So here the Braisa discusses, regarding these 3 cases, why does it say the term Ha'olah? So the first drasha is Al Yisaid Mizbach Ha'olah, saying V'lo Yisaid Mizbeach HaPnimi, that you pour the blood in the foundation of the outside Mizbeach and not on the foundation of the inside Mizbeach. Okay, so because this carbon, the Parkay Mashiach, the bloods of this carbon are actually brought inside the Beis HaMikdash to be sprayed on the inside Mizbeach. So you spray the blood on the inside Mizbeach, but then you have to bring it out and pour the leftovers on the outside Mizbeach, not on the foundation of the inside Mizbeach. Now this lashon of V'lo Yisaid Mizbeach HaPnimi does not mean that the inside Mizbeach has a foundation. It does not have a tefach of a foundation. But it's saying, theoretically, if it would have, at this point we don't have a source that it does not have. If it would have a foundation, you don't pour the blood there, you pour it on the outside Mizbeach. That's the first pasuk. Then it repeats it a second time by the next parsha, which is the par Helam Dovashal Tzibur. It says again, Al Yisaid Mizbach Ha'olah. Why is it saying it here again? I know that I compare everything in the par Helam Dovashal Tzibur. It says clearly in the pasuk, we learned it a few times before, it's compared to what it says in the parsha before by the par Kayim Mashiach. So it's not necessary to spell out again this halacha of Mizbach Ha'olah. Why is it saying it a second time? Ein lo yisoid pnimi atzmai. Here's where the pasuk tells you this fact that only the Mizbeach Ha'olah has the foundation, but the Mizbeach HaPnimi does not have a foundation. That's the second pasuk. Now, when it says it a third time, El Yisaid Mizbach Ha'olah, this is the third time it actually says it by the carbon of the nasi that brings a chatos for an aveda that he did, and actually by the nasi, the bloods of his carbon are not brought inside the Beis HaMikdash B'chlal. His carbon, the bloods are sprayed on the outside Mizbeach. And by him, it also says this lashon of Yisaid Mizbach Ha'olah. What does this mean? From here, I learn out 10 Yisaid Mizbeach Shalayla. This is the source for all karbanis, that the leftovers of the blood should be spilled on the foundation of the Mizbeach. Because it doesn't say this by all karbanis. It's from here, the third time I learn out for all karbanis, that it should be poured on the outside Mizbeach. Here, you can't say that it's coming to teach me that poured on the outside Mizbeach, not on the inside Mizbeach. There's no reason to think that it should be poured on the inside Mizbeach. This is not even blood of this carbon, the carbon of the nasi. It's not even blood that's ever brought inside. And I don't need the limo to say that the inside Mizbeach does not have a foundation. We already learned that out. So therefore, this pasuk is the source to say for all karbanis that you have to pour on the foundation of the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, maybe say that what you learn from here is that when you spray the blood on from the carbon oila, not pouring out, not the leftovers, but the zrika. When you spray the blood, you spray the bloods on the corners of the mizbeach, but which corners? Only the corners that have a foundation. The foundation of the mizbeach was on the maitiv of the mizbeach and on the tzofan of the mizbeach, and therefore it comes out that 3 of the corners of the mizbeach have a foundation by it. It's one corner though that did not have a corner that did not have a yesod. Which corner is that? The mizrachis draimis, east southern corner did not have a foundation there. So from where do I know that when I spray the blood on the mizbeach, before you get to the pouring, when you spray, that you don't spray on a corner that does not have that yesod there? Maybe that's what this pasuk is coming to teach. That it has to be, you spray the blood only on a corner that has a yesod. How do you know that this is an extra pasuk to teach me a source regarding all karbanis that you poured out on the yesod of the mizbeach? So Rabbi Shmuel says, because that halacha, I don't need to have this pasuk here. I have a kavachayim for that. Kavachayim is amashirayim sheim mechaprin tunin yesod. If when it comes to the leftovers of the blood from a carbon chatas, they do not bring the atonement. The atonement is done by the spraying of the blood. So still, when it comes to pouring out the leftovers of the blood, that's not a kapara. It has to be done by the foundation, tchilas oila. So by the carbon oila, if you're talking about the spraying of the blood, which is the atonement of this carbon oila itself, and it didn't most definitely it have to be sprayed only on a corner that has a foundation, which excludes the eastern southern corner that does not have a foundation. So that you don't need a pasuk for.
I'm sorry, you said that before that the inside altar
didn't have. No, so here we're talking about the outside mizbeach. The outside mizbeach, when you spray on it, it's not on that corner that does not have a yesod. So that is a kavachayim for. Now the Gemara, this is the way Rabbi Shmuel said the kavachayim. The Gemara here brings Rabbi Akiva that basically says the same kavachayim with a little addition. When it comes to the leftovers of a carbon chatas that are not any more necessary for the kapara, and he adds these words ve'ein boin lechapara, they don't come for a kapara. Tun and yisai, but nevertheless, where does it have to be poured? On the foundation of the mizbeach, tchilas oila. So the spraying of the blood of a carbon oila, shemechaperes, which is what the kapara is of this oila, ubal kapara, and it comes for a kapara. Definitely should have to be done on the foundation of the mizbeach. Exactly what the difference between the way Rabbi Akiva says this kavachayim and Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara is going to explain on the next daf. Okay, so now im keimat tamad loimel yisaid mizbach ha'ila. So this third time that it says yisaid mizbach ha'ila by the sire of the nasi, why is it saying it a third time? Ten yisaid mizbach ha'shalayla. This is the source to say that all karbanis, the leftovers of the blood, have to be poured on the foundation of the mizbeach outside. Okay, this is the braisa. Now the Gemara is going to explain this braisa piece by piece. So Amar, the Tana says here in this braisa, the first time that it says al yisaid mizbach ha'oila, what do I learn out from this? V'lo yisaid mizbeach ha'pnimi, that you don't pour it on the inside mizbeach. Says the Gemara, how do you know that it's coming to exclude the inside mizbeach? This is the first time the Torah is saying the halacha to pour the leftovers of the blood on the mizbeach. So maybe say that this pasuk is saying just the halacha itself, poured on the outside mizbeach, but to exclude the inside mizbeach, maybe I don't say that. Maybe you're supposed to pour it on the outside mizbeach, but you also have an option. If you poured it on the inside mizbeach, it would also be good. How do you know that it's not extra? So how do you know that this is an exclusion? So the Gemara says it is extra because it also says Ma'asher Pesach El Moed Nafka. As we quoted before, the pasuk says which mizbeach are we talking about? We're talking about the mizbeach that's outside at the opening at the door of the El Moed. So we know already we're talking about the outside mizbeach. Why does it say again ha'oila, indicating that it's the outside mizbeach as an exclusion to say that it cannot be poured on the inside mizbeach? And then the Braisa said is the second time, then there's the third time. When it says the third time, al yisaid mizbach ha'ila, what do we learn from there? 10 yisaid lemizbeach shalayla. That you have to always pour the leftovers of the blood on the outside mizbeach. Now, so here the Braisa explains the Gemara explains, how do I know that this is coming to be a source for all karbanis? Because the isal kedaitach kedechsev, if you would say that over here, this is by the carbon of the nasi, the blood of the carbon of the nasi is sprayed on the outside mizbeach. If you would say that then when the pasuk says that you should pour the blood, over here it's just coming to simply say the halacha, that you have to pour the blood on the outside mizbeach, sahani lamali, these extra words of mizbach ha'ela, what do I need these words for? Lamali kra, what do I need the pasuk for? L'shirayim, for the leftovers of the blood. Shirayim, haberoi avid lahu. Regarding the shirayim, this is a carbon that even the blood itself, the zrika of the blood, is done on the outside mizbeach. The karbanis we were talking about before, which is the par kayim Mashiach and the par helam davar shel tzibur, those are karbanis that the blood is brought inside. And still the Torah is saying, when you're done with the zrika inside, take the leftovers and spill it on the outside mizbeach. Over here, we're talking about a carbon that l'chatchila, the blood is sprayed on the outside mizbeach. So it's understood that the blood is going to be spilled on the outside mizbeach. Why would I think that you should take it inside? So therefore, there's no necessity to have this pasuk emphasizing that it's the outside mizbeach, mizbeach ha'olah, it's self-understood. Oh, but the Gemara actually argues back on this, and it says, "V'chi teime." Maybe if you'll argue and say, "No, I cannot conclude this logically because maybe the apech meipech, maybe the way it works with spilling out the remnant of the blood is that it's the opposite of where the blood was sprayed. Maybe that's how it works." And I'll say as follows: the broi legavoi. The blood that's sprayed on the outside mizbeach, so then the leftovers of the blood has to be spilled on the inside mizbeach, or the gavoi lebroi, and the blood that's sprayed on the inside mizbeach. Now the leftovers of the blood has to be spilled on the outside mizbeach. Maybe the Torah wants that the blood of every carbon should be placed both on the inside and the outside. So if you spray on the outside, so you spill out the leftovers on the inside. So maybe I do need the pasuk to say that no, you spill the blood on the outside mizbeach. So the Gemara says, no, but you still do not need a pasuk to say this, because ha'ein lo yisoid lepnimi atzmai. We already learned out from the second time that the Torah said mizbach ha'elah that the inside mizbech has no foundation at all. So there is no option to pour it out to the inside mizbech. Therefore, the third pasuk when it says mizbach ha'elah is teaching me the general rule regarding karbanis that you spill out the leftovers blood on the outside mizbeach, on the foundation of the outside mizbeach.